session. This is the What Freedom Looks Like talk series. And the objective is to really get us to explore what freedom looks like in a way that is beyond what we've been taught and told are our freedoms in this physical world, in this, the society, and all of the basically what has been deemed as freedom for us. This is basically an exploration of how do we obtain and accomplish freedom that allows us to be that way, regardless to what's happening around us. Make sense? So
Mhm.
we are, and you guys can, here's what I'll do going forward. Well, since it's just the two of you, you guys are welcome to chime in, or you can use chat if you want to make any contributions. Um, but ultimately, the idea is to explore what freedom is beyond the physical construct. So just as a quick overview and introduction to who I am Renaya Khalik, movement facilitator, conscious educator, and founder of Better Evolve. And it is through my work that I really help people to reconnect with their natural rhythm, their innate essence, and to really get them to recalibrate back to what I like to call their factory setting. So that specific code that was written by creator, by divinity, and getting them to operate from that space. And so through this talk series, the objective is to really get you to look at freedom through five tenets. The first tenet is detachment. The second tenet is deconstruction and dismantling, which we will be addressing today. The third tenet is radical self-love. The fourth, conscious creation. And the fifth tenet is embodiment. Okay. And so it is through these five tenets that we really get a closer look at what freedom looks like and what it is. Okay. Now, as a disclaimer, as I like to mention in all of my talks, that I am no expert in the subject matter of freedom. Ultimately, it has become an interest of examination and exploration and just curiosity about this human experience and how we have fallen into line according to what has been deemed as a path for us. And many of us are afraid to kind of come off that beaten path. And so the curiosity is, well, what is it that's been withheld from us, so to speak, right? What is it that we're missing out on? Like we're all, if you guys are familiar with Lemmings, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that computer game from back in the day. Really awesome illustration of kind of how we follow suit in life. The Lemmings game, basically, it's just a line of pupils that are lined up to basically waiting for their master, you as the controller, to tell them where to go next, what to do next, things of that nature. And so we are kind of in that space as in this human experience. And so the idea is to really get us to look at, well, what happens if we turn left? What happens if we turn right? What happens if we go in and ultimately identify what it is that our own inner barometer and where that leads us, right? And why haven't we been taught that? Why is that not part of the master plan of humanity, of this human experience? So without further ado, I wanted to start by sharing, and I thought I was going to be able to have my video of myself as well, but in any event, I wanted to start with my personal story. So, when we're talking about dismantling, the subject and topic of dismantling, I really wanted us to look at the idea of what we kind of know dismantling to be, what we understand dismantling to be. So when you think about a building or something that is being broken down into parts, that is essentially what we're talking about. And I want you to keep that in mind as we are thinking about how that lends to the idea of experiencing freedom, real freedom. And so my story is primarily about this. This series is also more so tailored towards women. And so my story is about my previous marriage, where what I recall from very young, the ideals of what it was to be a woman and the very limited roles that we had as women. That is wife, that is mother, that is nurturer, that is caretaker, caregiver, right? And then somewhere in that space, you find yourself and you kind of stick, and like I use the terminology barnacles, you kind of attach yourself as barnacles to these identities. And so no matter how much we say we don't want to be or we will not be like our mothers, we ultimately, as they are our first teachers, carry a lot of those ways into our own personal lives, right? And sometimes to our own detriment, and many times to a beautiful way to kind of carry on the legacy of motherhood, wifehood, things of that nature. But in my previous marriage, since I started so young in marriage and in motherhood, I remember the idea of wanting this perfect scenario of a life of a family and the intention of creating that with every brick, every piece, every slab of wood. And really, the ultimate idea was to create the idea of family, of mother, I mean, of wifehood and of motherhood. But in doing so, I recall negating and neglecting some very innate parts of who I was, right? Some of which I just subconsciously wasn't even aware of, but I was so fast and furious into creating this idea, this scenario of what this life looked like. And by neglecting and negating some of these areas of myself, attracting someone of this in that same manner, the foundation was laid. And then and of this foundation was many cracks and many holes and many things that weren't tended to because the objective was to build forward quickly and in a very finite and definitive type way, the way that I had learned to create this. And ultimately, the idea was that I was going to do it better than my mom did, right? And so, building on this foundation, focused on the roles, the what was to be done to fulfill those roles, and paying very little attention to the messages and information that was ultimately being communicated to me. And so, by building on this bad foundation, these it's kind of like the bare, like a home. Ultimately, you find there's instability and depending on what kind of homeowner you are, you might just kind of patch that up a bit, right? You might just do a little bit of repairs here and there, put a little bandage on it, but ultimately it becomes less and less stable for longevity. And what happens with that? You find that in a home, you now have maybe your roof is caving in, your ceiling rather is caving in, and your walls are starting to break down and things of that nature. Very much similar to us as individuals. Now, I want to kind of segment my story of my relationship with that of myself as an individual as well, and what contributed to this foundation or rocky foundation was who I wasn't being, if that makes sense, right? I was focused on who I was trying to be versus who I wasn't being. And it was in the who I wasn't being that were the ingredients for a solid foundation, if that makes sense. All right. So I usually use this analogy of a vase, and over time, I remember feeling like I was holding together this very expensive vase that I had dropped several times and picked back up to patch the pieces together and glue it together. And oh, if I can only keep this vase together. And the idea was that I would continue to mend it. And ultimately it was too much and I let it go and it broke and it fell to pieces and so the rest is history. So this is kind of a lead in to what it means to dismantle ourselves, what it means to dismantle our lives. By no means is this a conversation about go out there and break shit apart. This is more of a conversation about understanding that we cannot build forward if we are not building from stable foundation. And it doesn't mean that in the process of deconstructing and dismantling that you cannot repair. You can repair. This series, in fact, is all about restoration, but sometimes it does require a stripping all the way down to the bare bones and to a nakedness that reveals truths, that reveals vulnerabilities. And that's what some of us are in a space to do. So when we talk about what's revealed, looking at the analogy of a home, right? We have homes that, over time are showing mold and, infestations of that type. And then again, maybe it's just cracks. This equated to, for me, and ailments like fibroids that developed and anxiety, things of that nature that ultimately manifested in my being, in my body, rather, in my physical body. And that is the outcome of a bad foundation. A bad foundation being within self, within relationship, within society, whatever the entity is, the the poorly built or the bad foundation is what will manifest ailments, if you will, symptoms, if you will, that will result from that bad foundation. And so when we're looking at, let's see, so this topic again, dismantle and deconstruct, is about tearing down the false self to reveal the eternal one. Okay. And what we want to really explore is, what does it mean to tear down one's false self, and what we'll explore is the process of doing that, what comes with that, because it's no easy feat, but what is the objective in doing that, right? So let's talk about deconstruct defined. To take apart or examine something in order to reveal the basis or composition, often with the intention of exposing biases, flaws, or inconsistencies. So to break down or examine. And that's what we talk about when we mean by deconstruct. Now, I've divided this both for deconstruct and dismantle because even though they're very similar, one is a finer breakdown into the pieces, whereas deconstruction is really about examination, right? So dismantle, define, is to take to pieces. So spiritually, it's usually referred to be brought to the end of oneself, to learn not to rely on self, but on God. So to be brought to the end of oneself, whereas you are no longer reliant on your idea of what is or what should be. Rather, you are operating and relying on pure faith in the divine, right? Whatever you refer to that is God or the universe or whatever it is, right? But you are now operating from that space, and that is that core essence. So intuitively, this question is for you guys. What are signs that indicate that it's time to tear down or dismantle you or any parts of your life? What have you experienced intuitively that have given you signs that it is time to dismantle, to start breaking things down and to start examining the roots of it? And you guys can put your comments in, but since it's just the two of you, you can actually share your comments or get on the mic and tell me what your thoughts are.
For me, I would say looking at my results or even looking at results and examples before me, like my parents. Um, I love that they were married for 31 years. I
Hmm.
love that they up until my father died. I love that they just made sure that they did all these things to get them out of where they were.
Yeah,
And from there, it's time for me to, pick up the torch and take off from where they last left us, right?
right.
So that's all good. However, and I really appreciate them for that. But the one thing I noticed is when I had to dismantle everything was once my father died, I'm not being funny, but I was able to actually really see who my mother was all the way to her core. So I didn't
Hmm.
realize all these years she had been hiding behind my father. And she wasn't like a submissive wife or anything. It's just that she was able to like keep a pretty picture because my mom, she wasn't very like a very open person with us. She
Hmm.
don't share a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff we don't know about her. And because it's funny you actually mentioned all this because I actually asked her a couple of days ago. I said, how come you like never help me like prepare for marriage or get married? She's like, how can I do that? And that's when I
Hmm.
really knew it's time to break down all these walls because I see what's really happening. Like I knew before that, but it really, really, really sunk in at that moment. I said, all right, so I got to continue parenting myself. Even though I'm old now, I get it, but I'm like, I got to continue parenting myself because even though she provided well, I'm not going to get the emotional and the other stuff that I need that really matters to me, which is like becoming a wife and becoming a mother is what it was. But now those kind of changing, but still.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh my God, Jazzy, that's so beautiful because you're talking about dismantling the relationships that are close to you that ultimately are an extension that you're an extension of, right? In terms of what you've learned from and things of that nature. And you're absolutely right. I mean, it's many of us as women that especially, generations before us that have hidden behind our men or men in relationships, completely suppressing who we are at our core. And not only are our children shocked at it of it, because I've experienced the same, but we are shocked of it and often don't even know what to do with that identity, right? So it can be a very paradoxical kind of situation. But yeah, that's beautiful. So for you, it's kind of like, okay, I'm taking this torch, and I like to refer to this process often as peas and carrots. It's kind of like, depending on which one you like best and which one you don't. But if you prefer carrots, then it's like I'm going to sift through and out of your relationship and what I experienced through you and dad, mom. I'm going to keep these parts. I like the carrots, but the rest of this has got to go. And now I've got to figure out my own mix. So that's beautiful. Uh, and what about anything with you, Jer?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, good. I've got my headphones on, so I'm
Okay.
not disturbing the you know who person. Um, anyway, with 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 me, it would be more of the repeating, like the unhealthy patterns uh, that I've experienced with my parents as well, and his parents as well, and finding myself like in a rut to where everything around me matters more than me. And
Mm,
I'm just that same cycle going over and over. And it's an everyday thing to the point to where, you know, you get to the things that bring you joy don't bring you joy anymore.
mm,
So you have to find your joy and figure out you all over again and rebuild from that. So you break everything down and you're like, this is the issues. Let me you know, pick apart all the things that I'm feeling, get to the root of them, and then rebuild, then remantle everything and put it all
mm.
back together to where not only are the people around you happy, but you're now happy again.
That is so beautiful because you are in fact the core, right? You are
Yeah.
the core of a unit in that regard. And part of that dismantling process could very well be going back to those peas and carrots, looking at all of the things that you have identified as joy for you, have identified as part of your identity, and doing the very grueling and hard work of saying, maybe I actually don't like this. Maybe I actually don't want this, or maybe I actually don't feel this, or whatever it is, right? Because when we get into autopilot living life, we just are not, we don't take the time to do that hard work. We don't want to rock the boat ultimately, because that means everything changes and recalibrating can be difficult. But when we're talking about the bigger picture, the full essence of it all, um, freedom. Again, everyone has their own objectives, right? So I believe in resonance, and anyone that I connect with, I would imagine that they have some desire for achieving a real true sense of freedom. And I think it becomes more prevalent as we get older. We start to evaluate everything around us and say, is this really what's bringing me joy? Does this really allow me to feel free, or am I somehow in bondage within? So it sounds like both of you guys are looking at your parents and your parental um, figures in your life to help see where these things can be dismantled. Beautiful. All right, so let's take a look at so this is just a quote. Before you are rebuilt, you must remember what was never broken. And so we are basically talking about tearing with reverence. And this is so beautiful because, when you think about what was never broken, and if you were on my first call, which you were, Jerry, we talked about this this core, this essence of us that I like to call the mustard seed that was divinely, that we were divinely created to be before we were named human, before we were named by this society as any role or anything, before we made it through the passageway of human. We were already at the most authentic, organic core of our being before we were, contaminated, imposed upon all of these things. And so, therefore, never broken. We were whole, right? It is not until later that we started to be broken apart and pulled apart and things of that nature. So, when we're talking about rebuilding something, we must remember where we came from. And I believe that's the voice that speaks to us occasionally when it's telling us, we have that innate wisdom that is communicating to us. It's that voice of remembrance that either we acknowledge or we ignore. So the construct itself, welcome, Tina. Thank you for joining us, or maybe she jumped off. So the construct itself, we are born whole, and then piece by piece we are built upon. And so I want us to look at the self that was shaped by survival, performance, approval, the self that was shaped by generational trauma and patterns, the good girl, the achiever, the accommodator, the protector, all of these identities that were never false, however, they were considered functional. So we adopted them because they allowed us to function within the constructs of this society, right? Um, so when you guys think about your constructed self, all of us have similar but different stories, right? I've had an individual that I talked to who was the child of a mother who was a dancer, a very strict dance instructor who managed and owned a renowned dance studio in there and where they lived, where she grew up. And there was this certain level of expectation about how she showed up that was imposed upon her, and she was restricted to only being around, women and things of that nature. So, all of these things she grew up with, and they ultimately shaped her. And this is part, that's just an example. But if you were to think about what, like, if you had this, you have this opportunity to really reflect on what is it that I can recall just in this moment that has shaped me for survival, that has helped shape me by survival, performance, or approval. The self that was shaped by survival, performance, or approval. Do you remember any contributing factors to that?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So when I became a single parent,
Hmm.
I had to adjust to quite a few different ways, and it really shaped me for what was to be expected to be independent and be able to hold my own, because I came up in a household to where the father was always there and supported the mother and did all of that, but I didn't have all of that. So I believe that the father figure role that my dad took on really shaped me to be able to survive and stand up and be a parent and support my household, whether there was a man in it or not.
Very nice. So yours was, you remember a portion of your shaping that was based on survival. Is that what I understand?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And how much of that how do you see that mentality or that imposition? How do you see that contributing to even the later parts of your life, if that makes sense?
Well, I think that it contributes to how I am with the kids. So I want them to get their degrees. I want them to have the type of career to where, just in case, because we never know what happens with relationships and marriages and things like that, it shaped me to push them to do what they need to do to make sure they are self sufficient and not have to rely on someone. Not that I don't want them to be married and happy and
Right,
all of that and have
right,
two households, but I want, if something were to ever happen, I don't want them to be standing there, like, what do I do next, basically? Like,
right.
it may be tough, but I can survive on my own.
Beautiful. I love that. I love that because, we know these stories of survival can go either way, right? They can be one that that definitely says bootstraps up and, and then pass on that message to the kids. It's all about education. It's all about, career and things of that nature. Or it could go the other way where it's the idea of scarcity and that's what's passed on and it becomes, can be a bit detrimental. So I love that your experience was shaped you differently. Beautiful. Um, and what about any of you other ladies? Any of these points resonate with you most in terms of how you feel you were shaped by generational trauma and patterns? Any of these titles as the good girl, the achiever, the accommodator, the protector. Do you remember the origins of any of these things that might have shaped you and the choices that you've made? Okay, perfect. And I think, kind of just being in full transparency, similar to you, Jerry, I think for me, similar, I had the survival. um, mentality that was passed on to me, but it came from very much a space of scarcity. And so that was something that it took quite a bit of time for me to pull myself out of that space so that the idea was to empower myself so that there was no, so that feeling and insecurity of financial insecurity and things of that nature wouldn't be what would stifle me from growth and being careful about that being passed on to the kids, right? So again, I'm the other end of what you were sharing there. So, all right, so let's take a look at the next slide. Reflection. So, and I'm just gonna, this is something for you guys to look at later, but or to think about for later. But who have you become and who might be buried underneath her? And that is so powerful um, because, especially as women, some of us, we can have roles that become very finite. And then we are kind of, for lack of better ways of saying, tormented by this person, this being that is beneath all of that. And so it's interesting to reflect on this. Who have you become and who might be buried underneath her? So that's something for you to reflect on your own time. So let's talk about some of these identities and what they look like in terms of dismantling. I wanted us to look at what's been imposed on us, what's been self-inflicted, like self-imposed, and then how do we reframe some of these things so that we can look at these roles differently. Motherhood, first and foremost, is probably the hardest way to different to decide how else to see oneself because motherhood screams sacrifice. Everything about motherhood says sacrifice, give all of you, empty all of you, be everything for other people or for for the kids. I mean, everything about our even the way that our kids depend on us when they're hungry they feed and nurse from our breasts, so we have to be available to them. So it really does already encompass so much of compromise and who we are, but it's also about what's been associated with it from society, what limitations have been set on motherhood from society, and how do we explore that and decide, kind of like what you were saying, Jazzy. I saw my mom as a mother and a wife, and that was pretty much it. And she was kind of under, my dad's, I'm gonna, for lack of better words, under his thumb or something to that nature, right? But ultimately, you never saw her be beyond that, from what I understood. And so, how do we examine and look at motherhood to be more than just one that sacrifices all? So, this is what we have come to know motherhood as: the nurturer, the giver, the sacrifice. So, imposed on her, be endlessly available, give until you are empty, fulfill without fail, do it all with a smile. Does that resonate with anybody out there? And you guys can use the hands and all of that if you want to. You don't have to speak or even chat. Jazzy, I don't recall if you have children or not. I should say I don't know, but so I know the other two participants do. Um, yes. So self-inflicted. These are the things that we ultimately end up putting on ourselves, right? Guilt for taking space, belief that our worth is measured in what we do for others, pressure to be both soft and perfect, shame when overwhelmed, or needing help. And so let's talk about that for a little bit. I am going in the wrong direction. There we go. Come on, technology. Let's do this. There we go. Bam. All right. So let's talk about this a little bit. When we talk about the impose, again, I know many of you can relate to that. But I'm interested in knowing how kind of the progression from first time in motherhood, feeling all of these things or some of these things, or if you never did and you always found a way to define motherhood in your own way, and then how you progress to defining motherhood your own way. So again, the question is, can any of you share a story or your experience with diving into motherhood in a way that was very much imposed in these very finite ways, and then over time progressing? And what does that look like for you? If that's your story, if anyone wants to share.
Oh, I will. I'm sorry. I've been looking for this mute button for like the last 20 minutes. And
Awesome.
then whenever I would find it, I'm like, oh, I missed my window. Um,
Glad you found it.
yeah, I found it. So, a little bit of background. I have three children. For those that don't know me, I've got a 25-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 10-year-old. So they have pretty significant gaps in between the two.
Mm.
All three of my children had a different upbringing. My son, I was a single mom like Jerry, very different upbringing, split household. So he unfortunately didn't get the best of both worlds. My two daughters, they live in the house with me. Ada was a little more, um, how do I explain it? I had to be perfect for her. I had to throw the parties with the characters and these, and they were huge parties, and they were catered, and they were expensive parties, and I always had to look pretty um, during events. Fast forward to my third child, she is a free range chicken. Um, I She doesn't care. She's a happy child. She's an outside child. She's raised totally different. And I don't have as much mom guilt with her as I did with the other two. I always felt guilty about I didn't do this right, or oh my, I always forgot something, or didn't do something right, or didn't present myself right. But what I've learned in these last years is that time with your children doesn't mean they're happy. The time that I do spend with my children now is actually productive. We hang around each other. I have Velcro children now, and and it's okay. Like at some point, I stopped smiling, and they were like, "Mommy, what's wrong?" And I'm like, "Y'all literally make me angry." Like it's okay to say those things, which I felt like I couldn't say back then. A mommy always had to be smiling and put on that
Oh,
fake face, and now it's like, "Ugh, y'all drive me crazy. Go somewhere. Leave me alone."
I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. And again,
I'm about to interrupt you, April. I'm about to interrupt
oh,
you.
good, good, good.
I'm
Go
about to
ahead.
interrupt. Hey, T. Hey, girl.
Hey,
Um,
girl.
I got a question for you. Did you
Yeah.
find, because I found myself doing this with Ashley as well. Did you find yourself overcompensating for Cam because the guilt
Oh,
from not
absolutely.
being with his father?
Absolutely. I still
Yeah.
do that now. And he's 25, and I still
Oh no, I'm past that.
overcompensate.
I'm past that. I'm past that. I'm past
I
I was
love
told by my husband, like, you still won't let anything slide with Cameron. But again, that was my first child. That was the mom guilt kicking in. So I'm like,
that.
I have to overcompensate for him. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I first of all, thank you so much for sharing. I love what you've shared because what you talk about a couple things. There's this natural progression because of the order of the kids and the circumstances that occurred, right? So the oldest, middle, and youngest, they all have different experience. I can attest to that. All of them raised differently. But then so those are the things that had impacted you. You reacted to, you're reactive of, like with your oldest son, you having the guilt because he had the split home. So that was more of a reaction, right? That was yeah. And then middle child. I'm assuming you felt the need to overcompensate with her because of the what you couldn't really do for your oldest son. Is that, would you say that's true? Or why did you feel you had to be the show up mom, the throw big parties and everything for that, for your middle child?
Because everyone I knew was doing it.
Ah, okay, okay, good. Okay, so okay, so you were part of exactly. Oh, I love that. And so, and then, so it was the youngest child, which again, in a natural progression, by the youngest kid, we don't care if they wearing one sock and one, whatever. It's like you're kind of on your own, kiddo. I'm just
Yeah.
kidding. They
Oh,
usually are.
baby. Oh,
Yeah, they're
baby.
usually
Oh,
very
baby.
independent. But it also sounds like you've made some very intentional choices about how you relate with them, because even still, with the progression being you have this younger kid who is less demanding, who requires less in terms of these frills and things of that nature, you have opted to say, I am going to communicate in a very authentic way that does not cause me to really layer on the guilt, layer on the shame, layer on the the sacrifice of emotions, quieting the voice, all of these things that cause us to become sick, right? Basically, you have said, this is real mommy. This is what she looks like. This is what she sounds like. This is
Yeah.
how she looks when she's happy. This is how she looks when she's sad. This is how she looks when she's pissed off. And it's not this hiding, because those are the things that feed the imprisonment of our being, right? So I just love that you identified that for yourself. Yeah, that's beautiful. So in terms of guilt for taking space, belief that our worth is measured in what we do for others, pressure to be both soft and perfect, shame when overwhelmed or needing help. Do any of these resonate with anyone as far as like ways in which you've imposed on yourself? So there's some of the things that were imposed on us just because we were mom, and then there's some of the things that, and you touched on guilt already, Tina, but are there any of these that resonate with you guys about your worth, trying to figure out, you're soft and perfect and things of that nature, shame when you're overwhelmed and need help?
Well, I don't do well with the whole needing help thing. I know that's a problem of mine. And when I feel like I finally have to ask for help, I do feel like kind of let myself down a little bit because I feel like, well, maybe you didn't spend enough time doing what you need to do to prepare for these things versus always having to reach out for help. And that's probably because I didn't get it initially. So I overcompensated for that way. Like I would always, like Tina was mentioning, go all the way out. But I don't know if it was more imposed on me than it was something that I ended up liking, though. So that I don't know how that goes because I fell into the whole, it was something that I saw, but then I got a knack for it and I liked it. And it was my way of showing affection and with my friends, my family, my everybody when it came to that type of stuff.
Yeah. Now, and if I may, so one of the things that I would identify with that is what we do is when we find something that gives us a sense of worth, we cling to it, sometimes
Right.
to our own detriment, right? So because that was maybe because that's an identity that you have as far as the person that knows everything, who has all the answers, who's resourceful, who can figure things out, that is what you've shaped into your identity. So because it gave you value, it offered worth to to who you are. My question to you is, what does it look like if you weren't that person? If you literally just decided, I don't know the answers because I don't want to know the answers. I don't want to know. I don't want to be the person to figure this out. I don't want to think about solutions anymore. I want to let that go. What would that look like in your world?
That's a good question. I
Mm,
haven't, I guess as the kids got older, I
hmm
took on more of that saying no or I'm not going to do it anymore,
hmm
that type of situation. But it's a more less stressful situation because
Because the
I
kids are
push
gone.
back from the table. Yeah, I
Yeah.
push back. They can ask me stuff now, and I'll be like, mm-mm. Yeah. No, no,
Yeah,
I don't think I'm doing that. So, so
yeah.
what it looks like is for me, I guess, would be probably less stressful. Y'all think I was laid back before. I'm really laid back now. So,
Yeah,
I guess that's what it looks like for me. Just speaking up now instead of just saying, "Okay, I'll do it." You know,
yeah,
now I'll say, "No, I don't have time for that,"
yeah.
or "I don't want to do that."
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, here's an interesting point on that, Jer. When we think about energy, everything that we do, I mean, our bodies as we're sitting here are working like crazy. Like, I mean, they're in full go mode right now without us doing anything extra, right? When we think about the energy that is exerted for us to do extra, to go over and beyond, which is really what this, again, this topic of freedom is about. When we overexert, especially as women, when we just, and we talked about this the first session, we're like this quiet force. We're this like nature. We just don't have to do the most. We don't have to. We're already a freaking force just by being. But when we are overexerting and it's rooted in, these issues of self-worth and shame or guilt or whatever the case might be, then we ultimately are taking away from the potential to express from our being in another way. So you were talking about earlier in the conversation, that you are looking for finding that joy for yourself. Like, what does that look like? What is it that really makes me happy? What is it that I want to do? And that's where you are now. You're now, and this continues with conscious creation and radical self-love and things of that nature. But right now, we're talking about dismantling. You have, I mean, and it comes with kids being gone. You free up some cognitive space. You free up some spiritual space. But what I invite you to explore is that now you have this open space to create something new. Like that energy is no longer being overexerted in that area. So instead of it being a dormant space, how do you intentionally create something that feeds your soul, feeds your spirit, feeds your being, and prioritize that. So that because I always feel like we have this scale, and when we are giving so much on this side, then there's something being depleted, and that's part of motherhood. But that is traditionally part of motherhood because of how we were taught. But when we have emptied nests, we get this opportunity to explore differently. Um, so looking at motherhood when it's stripped down, so empowering reframe. So, what remains is an innate nurturing essence, wisdom keeper, teacher of life and legacy. And this is really allowing us to see ourselves in this way, right? Again, motherhood could feel very finite. We never really think, well, who are you? I'm a mother. And we never really think about, well, what does that mean, right? I gave birth to a kid, I take care of a kid, I nurture a kid, that's mother. And sometimes if we get too descriptive, I throw birthday parties for the kids, I dress my kid. But when we really think about what we are doing, what remains, it's that innate nurturing essence. It's who we are as mothers. We have an innate nurturing essence. We already know to feed our children when they're hungry. We know to protect our children when they need protection. These are things that are innately in us. Wisdom keeper. We have in us an innate wisdom that has been passed on from our mothers and our mothers and our mothers' mothers and generations before about this innate nurturing about you know uh, our essence and power as women. We know these things. We teacher of life and legacy. We're like the herbalists and the medicine women. You got your grandma you call for when you need, to find out how to take care of a bobo for your kid, whatever, right? These are the things that really make up who we are. And I think, as we talk about how do we reframe this for not just ourselves, but even our children, which probably already have a better idea of this because they're so much more conscious than we ever were. But like, how do we make sure that we can empower who we are as mothers? And then what helps once we strip this down, we're also looking at truths that surface. I am not defined by what I do for others, but by who I am within. And that's like a keeper. It's like a keeper. You go around everywhere you go, and it's like my check, my barometer. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you are my baby, my kid. I don't care if you're my husband. I don't care if you're my partner. My barometer check starts here. It starts here because that is the truth for me. And then once you start layering out, that's when things get muddy. That's when you get confused, when you start thinking about, okay, well, if I say no, then he's going to feel like no. The I am not defined by what I do for others, but by who I am within, that being your truth keeper, that affirmation there. And then what emerges? A sovereign woman who nurtures from fullness, not depletion. And one of the things that we were never taught as women, we talk about the oxygen mask theory quite a bit, but you get on a plane, they say, take care of yourself first, then take care of them little nappy head kids, right? And so that's the idea, is knowing that I have to be first in care because I have the work of nurturing, of carrying out wisdom, of whatever it is. That's my job. That's my, that's part, not job, but that's part of who I am. So I must be well first so I can take care of other people. All right, so we're going to look at the supporter, and I think we might, looks like I'm going to be a little short on time. So the supporter is kind of the same thing. I'm sorry, the wife or the partner, be the calm in his storm, shrink to keep the peace, carry emotional weight for two, align your identity with his. Any of this resonating with you, ladies?
I think you know the answer to that one.
Okay, I know it was a cheap shot. That was a cheap shot. All right, cool. So moving on to self-inflicted. Self honestly, and I probably can't even, I probably don't even need to ask you this, Jerry, because I think we've talked about this, just the progression there of like how you came from that and all of a sudden was like, screw you, or like, not really, but like ultimately,
Yes, yes, yes.
yeah, 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 yeah. Like,
It was like you got to get it together. Yeah, yeah. Here
yeah,
we
yeah,
go.
yeah, yeah. So, and with that, did you feel any lift from being able to redefine or recalibrate y'all's relationship or that
Oh,
dynamic?
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I think the intimidation was, my mother was always the quiet one and didn't really say too much. My dad kind of run the ran the household, and what he said went. And I mean, I looked at it that way, like, okay, well, let me just go by what he's saying because that's just how it has to be. But I think it was when I started to put myself first, and
Yeah.
I was like, wait, I do everything for everybody.
Hmm.
So now it's time for me to do for me. And you're going to have to act right because I do way too much for you to be not acting right,
Right.
It's just like, yeah, you gotta get it together. And I
Yeah.
think when my lines of communication opened, instead of me being so soft spoken and not saying things that I felt, once I opened up and I was my real true self,
Hmm.
then I got to live the way I should have been living prior to. And we developed, here I was, back it up a little bit, here I was intimidated to say anything, and we could have been developing way sooner than what we did if I
Absolutely.
just would have opened my mouth,
Yeah. Yeah.
instead of being so timid and being like, okay, well, I guess that's what I need to do. But, because, I wanted to be the good wife and the good mom and all that other stuff. But then when I started opening the lines of communication, and I was like, okay, well, I'm not saying that I disagree with you. I'm saying that, maybe let's compromise. There's got to be a compromise here. It can't be an all or nothing situation because, you can't run any type of household with, 100% this way and, or 50-50. It just doesn't work that way. Some days
Right.
he gives the 70, some days I give the 70, some days it kind of goes either way. And you got to meet that person in the middle or however percentage you got to go. So I think I just had to learn to be my true self and open up a little bit more and those lines of communication. And once we started telling each other things that we weren't intimidated to tell each other, then things got a whole lot better.
That's so powerful. Yeah. That intimidation, it's, I mean, that it's really just a passing down almost. I mean, I think you said your mom was quiet or she was kind of the same, right? In her relationship.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
very much.
yeah. And I actually remember I have experienced the same thing, just kind of going, just going with the go, going with the flow kind of thing. But ultimately what we find is that the complete opposite happens. It's really like you said, open up the communication ways, pathways so that there's actually growth and movement from that, right? But it's that area that of guilt so let me backtrack. My experience with that approach and watching my mom even was because there was a trade-off where I know for her, and I've experienced the same thing, right? Where because she was in a situation where she was in need of something, that she quieted herself because it was kind of like, well, who am I to say anything because of these situations, right? And I think that it ultimately, and that was at the origins of their relationship. I mean, my dad's 13 years older than her. And, over time, I think that she lost her voice because she felt like she basically, how would I say, why would I even think to say no to you or to counter anything you have to say? But then I think finding that power and that dynamic is so beautiful because it really does say, okay, now I'm allowing myself and I am looking for you to look at me as an equal, as someone that is just as valuable in contribution, that does a very important, who contributes a very important piece to this, to our dynamic. And that this is not about, that's the dynamic that I want to be able to create. So anyway, I'm sharing that because I've experienced something very similar to that, and that being the reason why I would keep quiet, because my fear would be, well, how do I say something when, X, Y, Z? And so having guilt because I actually have an opinion about something. Um, so here's a topic that I think is really interesting: the self-worth tied to relationship success. Now that one I can definitely attest to because of my previous relationship. Does that ring truth for anybody at any point in your relationship? Neither of you? So that
Sure,
one,
if it's like the self-worth would be tied to relationship success with me because I think, because we kind of grew up together, we were kind of young. I don't think either one of us really looked at like self-worth had to be tied to us being successful. It was more of a because we didn't ever really show face. You know what I mean? Like if shit was bad, it was bad. I'm
yeah.
sorry, I'm cussing.
No,
If
you're
stuff was bad, it
good.
was bad, and
Right.
it was never like let's fake the funk. I mean, hell, we had neighbors that lived right next to us that knew stuff that was going on because I moved out or the situation was what it was. So it wasn't any kind of save face situation. It
Yeah.
was more of a you know you wanna we didn't neither one of us really had a marriage to kind of like an example. You know what I mean? So we were
Gotcha.
kind of
Yeah.
like throwing it to the wind, basically. Like, let's see
That
what
makes total sense. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, and I think that what happens is that the whole time you are getting real-time information about yourself from that other person. So it's not even really about the relationship. It's really about
right, right.
this is what's happening and I'm experiencing myself through this. And, so it becomes that exchange. So yeah, that makes total sense. I get
I
that.
got kind of an example. It's a recent example.
Mhm.
Because again, I think we all have the same thing in common. We grew up in survival mode, or I did in a way. I have middle child syndrome for sure.
Same.
Um, but
Wait, are we all middle children?
maybe that's
That's
why we get along.
hilarious. That's
um,
good.
but the first time I ever struggled with self-worth was when I was laid off at Philips. That
Mm,
had never, ever, ever happened to me. Whatever job I had, I applied myself 1,000%, gave my all. This was my first time, like super corporate job. making really, really good money. So when that happened, I spiraled big time.
Mm.
I closed off a lot of people, but I didn't. I was like, I was in the toilet. I'm not gonna lie. That's the only way to put it. But
That's
I
great.
really, really was. It was very dark days.
Hmm.
Um, However, the one person who actually came to me and said, "It's okay," was Colin.
Hmm.
I'd never seen that side of him before, like that nurturing side. He's
Oh.
always there because I'm doing something stupid, but
What?
but I'd never seen that side of him before, and I just kind
Mm.
of latched onto him and got really clingy with him because
Mm.
no one had ever done that to me before. So
Oh, that's beautiful. I
yeah,
love
so
that. I love
kudos to
that.
the man for that.
Yeah,
Don't
yeah.
tell him I said it though.
Yeah, but but that's actually a beautiful spin on the self-worth. Like it's kind of like I'm having this vulnerable moment, and yes, my self-worth is a bit compromised here. I'm kind of like doubting what I'm able to do and who I am right now because this blow, right? Um, so you've kind of put a spin on this part about you being able to look to your husband to basically give you some love and nurturing attention as it contributes to your relationship success. So I'm sorry, but I have to look at it this way now, and that's pretty cool. So I like that, but that's beautiful. Beautiful. All right. So when we look at what our relationships are stripped down, who we are as a wife, what remains is our capacity for connection, love, sacred union. And I think that's so beautiful because that's just who we are at our core, whether we're wife, mother, employee, whatever. We have this capacity for connection, the feminine energy, and all of us even, but the feminine energy so much at our core, the way we were divinely designed, love and sacred union. Truth surfaces. The truth that surfaces, I do not need to lose myself to belong to another, which is, I believe, our generations and back have been guilty of, have experienced to some degree or another, some more extreme than others, but that losing of oneself and understanding that, I can, like you said, Jared, speak my voice. I can, all of these things that allow us to not truly compromise who we are. And then what emerges is a woman who partners in power, not from lack, but from wholeness. And Tina, I want to give you accolades in this because I truly feel that you are a beautiful example of someone who, both of you actually, now that I think about it, but I'm just seeing, I guess, seeing how you've evolved and to be in this soft power. And I've always known you in your individual as a powerful woman, but how you've evolved into this soft power that, like, I mean, seeing you kind of recede back into your family dynamic, but not in a way that says I'm in the sunken couch or whatever that analogy is, like in a way that I am orchestrating all of this, but I don't need to be like, look at me in the front. That's what I see. And I think it's so beautiful. So
Okay.
I think that's what we have to remember is that we are someone that partners in power and not from lack, but from wholeness. And yeah. All right. So I'm going to skip this and we'll see if we can get closer to. So we'll talk about really quick the holy deconstruction. And this is where we really understand that deconstructing is not about rebellion, it is about reverence. I mentioned that breaking the vase, it's something interesting to think about what happens when we actually decide to break the fucking vase, right? Like when we say, okay, drop, it's enough is enough, right? And it's really about what's left after that and what does it mean to how does that shift, what does that pivot, because everything has an outcome, everything turns into something, right? But when I think about a scenario where we hold on and continue to hold on to something that's broken and there's no mending that is happening, I think about what that actually could mean in the negative sense, right? You're carrying on the idea of enduring something that's not healthy. So kids see that, right? You're carrying on the idea of self-inflicted pain and sacrifice and things of that nature. So that's something that's just in prolonging a generational thought process, a generational pattern. So sometimes it's just important to break that shit and, and do the hard work of rebuilding, right? Because ultimately, to continue to build upon that foundation is what is not is just not healthy. So tearing down is not chaos; it's divine order in motion. It is not failure; it's prophecy. When you strip away what you're not, what remains is God's original code in you. So at the end of the day, that's what's the objective anyway. I need to be able to operate from here. Um, let's see. Going to move on to so really quick, we're going to just talk about everything built on fear must fall so truth can breathe. So when we think about spiritual freedom, begins where certainty ends. God's source divinity does not live in the scaffolding. So it's not in a temporary dwelling. It lives in what is eternal, innate, and resonant. And so everything about this series, what freedom looks like, is about us getting back to that spiritual space, our source divinity, and really connecting with what that is, what resonates with us. So you are not building a new identity, you are remembering the original one. Does this resonate with either of you ladies in terms of operating and Tina, we've had some of these conversations now that I think about it, that ability to manifest and that faith and things of that nature. But do you either of you experience regularly the communication from within that tells you that you are either in alignment with your divine code or not? Are either of you in tune with this part of you that speaks about how you should be uh, navigating? If that makes sense, do you ladies experience this?
I love this topic. I love talking about manifestation. It's like once you get it, I don't understand. I can't explain to people how to actually do it,
Hmm.
but there's a calmness out there. Like you can actually create whatever. I don't care what scenario it is. You can create it yourself. And I hope I don't sound crazy when I say that, but
Yeah.
I've done that in so many parts of my life. I've created a position in my job that doesn't exist. I've created
Yes, ma'am.
right. I've seen things, I vision things in my backyard. I've a car that I want to drive. There's like a certain feeling when you're really, really connected to the universe or spirituality or God or whatever you want to call it.
Hmm.
That thank you. That was Alina.
Hmm.
That when you're welcome, baby. Um, it literally is if you can see it, you can feel it, I mean, you feel it on your body, you feel it in your mind, your heart. Um, so whatever you want, you literally can manifest it.
Yeah, yeah. Would you say that that's something that's a little bit more pronounced in your life now in terms of manifesting in your favor?
Yes.
Or okay, and
Yeah.
I kind of feel that from you as well. Um, and let's be just to clarify, manifestation is both, it's either of good or bad, or and those are terms that shouldn't even be used. When you manifest, whatever you create is what you create. So
Yes.
if you create chaos or dissonance or
You can do that. Yeah.
that's still your manifest, still the manifestation of what is
Hmm.
based on what it, and that's based on what you have latched onto, in my opinion, in this physical world.
Yes.
Things that define you in a very finite way, which basically creates limitations to your manifestation powers, right? So you
Mhm.
manifest not badly, but in your, against your, I mean, and again, I don't even like to say against your desires because truth be told, when we manifest, whatever it is that we manifest, even if it appears to be negative or not something that someone wants, it actually is what we in fact desire because if fear is rooted in it, if it's any other thing that's rooted in it, we are choosing this lesser part, this lesser thing to manifest because it keeps us comfortable. It keeps us to feel safe.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh
So
yeah, total
we,
sense.
yeah, so even if it looks like, this, my relationship and this, that, and the other, or, I lost my job or all of these things, whatever, right? There is still a part of us that is being responded to by the universe that we are communicating in another way. Like, right. So it's very important that when we think about manifestation, we're not just talking about all of the woo-hoo-hoo good stuff, right? It's really everything that is
Yeah.
a result of our actions or lack thereof. So, but it's something beautiful to be in resonance, and that is where freedom lies, right? So when you are operating from that divinity, and it is without attachment, and it is without, I always tell people to objectify their experience as a human. You are this human looking upon yourself, and you have all these things that are around you: fear, anxiety, insecurities, all these things that you can latch on to, and they don't ever go away. They're just gonna be there. They're going to come in and out of your life occasionally, right? But to objectify them means that if you can follow the illustration, like, you just kind of like move out of the way. I see you, I acknowledge you, but like, I'm not going to be bothered by you. You know what I mean? And you can find your way through that. But it's just important that we understand that when we are not able to manifest what it is that is in alignment with our highest self, with what provides us freedom, then it is because we are still latching on to some of these limiting beliefs, some of these attachments that are holding us down, okay, which is probably a big one is fear. Um, so glimpses of what's been there all along. And that's kind of what we're talking about. The voice that whispers when the world is quiet, the intuition that was silenced by expectations. We as women strong, everyone has intuition, but I strongly believe the feminine energy is has very strong uh, intuition, the knowing that returns when you stop performing. So when all you've known is removed and all you've done is burned, what remains is truth. What remains is power, right? When you're stripped down to the bare nakedness of your being, you will find truth and you will find power. And to build from that space, you know and what you were saying, Tina, is exactly how someone can be in the midst of a unstable foundation, in the midst of a rocky situation or chaos, and decide to exercise this gift of manifestation to change the scenario. So in that case, the dismantling or the deconstruction only is in examining what needs to be changed here. What needs attention? What needs to be done here? But maybe not breaking it all the way down to the ground, right? Where some people need to break things all the way down to the foundation. So if you are able to, while you're in it, and Jerry, you did the same thing with your relationship, you within all of the layers and layers and layers and layers of things that occurred over that time period, that could have buried you and made you completely lose yourself. You decided to recalibrate that relationship, and in the midst of all of that, define what it is that you truly desired and wanted for yourself. You know what I mean? So sometimes we don't have to completely tear things down. I, for one, did. So let's go on to the next. So to break apart is to give way for new, for intentional evolution. What does this look like? I love this quote by Socrates: the unexamined life is not worth living. So when we are willing to examine what is and say, nope, this is not what I want. Like you said, Jer, this is not, I want to, I had to deal with survival. I don't want that from my kids. I'm going to change the rhetoric. I'm going to change the expectations and things of that nature. But when we examine life, the unexamined life is not worth living. So we can rewrite genetic makeup. We always hear people say, oh, cancer runs in my family, diabetes runs in my family. Only reason those things are prevalent within any family legacy is because everyone was taught the same pattern of eating, the same pattern of living. That means the body reacted the same way. Does that make sense? So the body took form and took shape and did all of whatever it did genetically because over a time period, those practices, those patterns, all of that has was just what we knew. And it was done the same thing repetitively. Now, with the era that we're in, with all of this awareness, if people change the way they are eating, if they change their mental health and on that becomes the norm, and now we have generations to come, we probably will see that those generational health issues will deter. They will change because now we're no longer being raised on, XYZ and exposed to XYZ and dealing with, crazy stress and all kinds of things that came with post-traumatic issues. Are you guys following me on that? I don't know if y'all are following me, but yeah. So basically, when we're talking about what it means for us to examine what is, that's the idea of, okay, this is what was done. This is what can be done differently, and that would change a whole stream of patterns. Again, rewriting breaking generational curses, rewriting systemic injustices, all of that. When we examine, we are able to pivot a lot of what is. So I think this is the end of it. So in terms of self-reflection, what what in me must fall so that I may rise? What belief, what identity, what truth am I now ready to lay bare? What structure have I worshiped that now must be dismantled? And then your most self-honoring question is, how do I honor and protect what remains as my essence and truth? Okay. So I am going to share these questions with you guys. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap up because it is well over time. I thank you so much for hanging out with me. This has been recorded, so if you have any issue with me sharing this, let me know. But this is part of me building my library of content for this series. Um, and now that we've broken apart, how do we protect and honor? And that's really going to lead into the next topic, which is radical self-love. So if you want to come, this one's going to be live. It's going to be at Doshi House on the 20th, and that's out in Third Ward. But if you want to come and join me there in person, invite whomever you feel might benefit from this conversation. Radical self-love is a topic that I get excited about. There's a lot of good jewels in there about what that means, and it kind of lends to what you were talking about earlier, Jerry. So I think you would benefit from that one as well. But it will also be live on Facebook. But yeah, that's it, beautiful ladies. I so appreciate you. Thank you so much for joining me.